Hello, my name is Hanson Oak, and I want to tell you my story. When people meet me, they tend to say one of two things. Some ask if we've met before, and many times we have, but memories of me are fleeting. The other is that I look tired. If I'm honest, that comment is repeated more as I get older. I'm scarred by the life I've led, and the fact that I do not sleep isn't helpful to the exhaustion that becomes more evident with each year that passes. You might say, Mr. Oak, do you know how important sleep is? And I might reply, do you know how dangerous it is? When I learned the truth of sleep, the secret hiding behind our closed eyes, I made the choice to avoid it when I can. It was then I had a friend create an alarm clock of sorts. It's a mechanical pulse monitor that clamps onto my wrist when I sleep. Once locked, it will not open until morning or if it's been triggered. When my body enters REM sleep and my heartbeat and breathing change, the 6 legs of the bracelet clamp shut and pinch my flesh to wake me up. It may seem extreme to have 6 sharp spikes bite to simply break my sleep, but I need to be sure it'll call me back. Back from where? Well, that's the question I once asked too. I was driving through the desert looking for her, the one who taught me about the truth of sleep. The woman covered with blood in the back seat, asleep with the aid of sedatives, was Victoria Sinault, the woman who I had received a letter about not long ago. She would wake soon, and if she did, she'd be dead. Yes, waking dead seems like an oxymoron, but it's actually a very serious condition which happens more often than you'd think, and I wish to avoid it for both our sakes. The place I was looking for in this dusty, burnt landscape moved frequently, necessarily nomadic, and my time and gas was running short. I'd left the road about an hour before, my truck bumping and slipping over the sand and succulents. The fuel light lit yellow, marking the last bit of dust in the hourglass, the last gallon of gas in the tank, the last few miles I'd be able to search in comfort of a car before walking out into my death. I cursed her for finding such a clearly superior place to hide, while also finding pride that she was somewhere safe. I cut the wheel, moving around an outcropping of red rock, and began to laugh, mad with relief to see the silver airstream I'd been looking for. The sun sparkled off its stainless skin like a diamond as I raced towards it. The door of the trailer opened quick, and a woman emerged and charged towards me with the shotgun set to stop my approach. I slammed on the brakes and skid to a stop alongside a cloud of thick dust that blocked out the woman, the trailer, the sky, and the rest of the world. I turned off the truck and waited, sat in silence of my own breathing and the hiss of a hot engine. Then a knock on a window, and my heart hid in my throat. I turned to see the blue barrel of the gun pointed at me and the woman who held it leaning in to see who had come unannounced. When she saw it was me, she lowered her gun and shook her head. "Turn around, Mr. Oak," she said. "Head on back to the city or under a rock or wherever the hell it is you hide when you're not bothering me." Admittedly, it was not the warmest of welcomes that I've gotten, but far from the coldest. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the dust that was just starting to thin out. The sun-baked Mrs. Janet Wilt was never a gracious host, but for good reason. Visitors were always trying to kill or kidnap her daughter. I left the car and followed her, telling her this was the last time, to which she rightly pointed out that I said last time was the last time. She stopped and turned back, the barrel of the gun carelessly or purposefully pointing at me once more. She was only in her mid-40s, but cracked and faded by the sun like the ground that we stood on. She let out a breath and her tension, asking how I was. I told her I'd been better, and she lit a cigarette and turned half of it to ash with one draw. There was no reason to delay why I'd come. Small talk is for people with time who don't understand the fleeting nature of our existence, and our existence, Janet's and mine, is more fleeting than most. "I need to see Grace," I said. Janet pointed her gun at the truck, asked who the woman was in the back seat. I told her she was why I was here. She needed help. Janet said no. She was done looking after strays and wished I'd stop bringing them around. I explained that she might die if I couldn't ask Grace just a few questions. I could see that she felt the weight of this, knowing that I don't choose my words without merit, and she stared back at the truck for a long moment before she said, "If she helps her, then Grace might die." I asked if it'd come to that. She said that it's taken longer for Grace to come back than usual. I realize now that you're unaware of some very important details, so allow me a minute to fill you in. A few years ago, in the mouth of a particularly harsh New England winter, I received a letter from Victoria's husband, Greg, pleading with me for help. For a few months, he said she's been experiencing change in her sleep and that it was growing far more troubling for both of them. It started when she began taking medication to induce that sleep. It's common for people using these medications to experience strange and terrifying dreams, but they never truly know the reason for it. Most assume it's how the medication interacts with the chemicals in your brain, but that's not the case. The why in this case is far more dark and more troubling. The reason everyone, whether they remember it or not, have terrors in the night is the same reason I wear this biting band when I sleep. The dreamer cannot wake and slips deeper into sleep, deeper than they've intended to, than is natural to do. And no, they're not spiraling towards death, though it can occur. Instead, they're connecting with the other side of our conscious world. This is a place mankind has also created, but more indirectly. It is a collection of dreams and nightmares built inch by inch with mortar of their lost faith and childhood abandoning. It's strange, yet familiar, fantastic, but terrifying. There are things that we did not create in this world as well, creatures and beings that have anchored themselves there. And when the mind realizes it's crossed over, it's far too late for the body to wake up, and sometimes the body won't wake up. The real worry is not dying, well, not at first, as it's very rare, but becoming a ladder for the things on the other side to come into our world. To visualize this, think of a beach and imagine a hermit crab wishing to wade in the waters. He leaves the safety of his shell on the sand and wades into the waves. Of course, there is the risk that the tide will devour him, but that's not the real worry. The real worry is that something will leave the water and use the crab shell for its own, leaving it stranded. The crab can't survive without its shell. And so it is with us. Some things wait for us to swim out into the other side just far enough that they can come and take what we've left on the shore. As a backstop of sorts, whatever takes our body will find the escape short-lived. Like an organ implanted, the body will reject this foreign object inside it. It will wither and die without us. But before it does, the monster in your body can do a lot of damage. There are some who willingly trade places with such creatures, striking a deal, visitation rights of sorts, using their body as an Airbnb. They're called mirrors, seers, visionaries, and have been used since the ancient times to see the future or to offer a perspective on this world that anyone bound to it just can't. But their balance can't be maintained forever. The longer the spirit stays on the other side, the harder it is to come back, and, of course, the creature that takes up residence in their body doesn't have to return it. In Victoria's case, the creature that took her body was vicious and cruel. First, the change was subtle, snapping at her two kids, at Greg. Then she began to hit and torment them. She was accused of killing the animals in the neighborhood, domestic and otherwise, and was often seen wandering around naked and cursing and barking at anyone who made eye contact. Obviously, Greg sought help through the usual channels: therapists, doctors, homeopathic practitioners, priests of any religion who might listen, and then, of course, me. By the time I'd reached the home in southern Idaho, things had gotten much worse. Greg answered the door with swollen eyes and an unkempt beard. His clothes were stained and wrinkled. The smell from inside the house was like a stale August casket. All the lights were off, windows closed, shades drawn. When he saw me, he wept, fell into me, and I held the weight of his hope that whatever had happened to that moment would end because I'd arrived. A common misconception. A shadow peeked from around a corner, curious eyes on a young face. One of the children, a girl, came into view at the coaxing of her father. Her appearance was as haggard as his. She looked feral, like someone had put a t-shirt on a forest piglet. I asked where the other child was, to which they both looked away. Greg informed me that she was in the hospital. Victoria, her mother, had tried to eat her. Obviously, things had escalated since the letter. This explained the state of the home and the people left inside it. I asked where Victoria was, and he told me he'd put her in the basement and torn away the stairs. I asked to see her, and he pointed towards the door in the hallway. I then asked if Victoria had been taking sleeping pills, as I suspected she had been, and I told Greg to get them, as many as there were to get. When I opened the door, I looked down into the pit. Essentially, that's what a basement becomes with no stairs or other means of egress. Victoria was waiting just below, staring up at me, her teeth snapping, her arms and hands reaching and grabbing at me, and she tried to claw her way up the cement walls. Blood covered her face and arms, caked under her nails, matted in her hair. I sat in the threshold, a large bottle of sleeping medication in my hand, and began holding them out, waiting till she snapped her open mouth to try to bite my fingers, and dropped a pill inside. I told her this wasn't her fault, that I would try to make it right, but knew even if I could, she probably wouldn't be able to forgive herself for what she'd done. It's times like that made me wonder if bringing Victoria back would hurt more than it would help. I have my own children, and I simply just couldn't imagine the guilt of, well... After an hour and a dozen or so sedatives later, Victoria was asleep. I had Greg help me get her out of the basement and into the back seat of his truck, which brings us to the beginning of this story. I assured Janet that if there was another place for me to go, I would, and that I would promise not to find them again in the future. I told her if she ordered me into the desert and to let Victoria die where she laid, I would understand. But she did not, as I knew she would not. She stepped aside so I can go into the trailer. I stopped and took an envelope from my pocket, a paper sleeve filled with a few $1,000s in cash, enough to help Janet with gas and food, and Grace. It was an offering I offered, not the payment that Janet demanded. If it was 100 degrees outside the trailer, it was 1,000 degrees inside. The heat took my breath away, which was half a blessing because the smell was just as overwhelming. On the counter, fast food wrappers and uneaten portions of food were piled up. The stench of urine and feces mixed with the rot made my knees weak. It was not that Janet was neglectful, but she did not come in here when Grace was like this. It wasn't safe for her to do so. The best that can be expected of her was to clean and care for Grace when she, the Grace that was the rightful consciousness of the body, returned. I closed the door behind me, put myself in the dark. All the windows were painted over. I was in the living room and the kitchen. A short, narrow hall led to a closet accordion door where the bedroom and presumably Grace was. Something stirred. I heard a growling, a grumbling, scratching, creaking. The trailer vibrated, shook. I choked on the heat and the stench and waited. "Hello, Mr. Oak." Grace's voice was a fox's breath, short and all but silent. "I've been waiting." The light in an already dim trailer snuffed out almost completely, as if the sun had set immediately. The plastic door scratched and creaked as it opened. The shadows would not give up their secrets. Try as I might, I could not make out Grace, but I could feel her. "You knew I would come?" I asked. She was coming closer, and my eyes found her outline. Her body was twisted, her eyes rolled back in her head, her mouth locked in a smile of grinding teeth. Her skin was pale, dirty, like mud smeared across porcelain. "Yes, Mr. Oak, I've been waiting." "Then you know why I'm here," I said. "I assume it has to do with the bloody woman in your truck." Another step, and now the light finds her. I try not to turn away to show my repulsion. Her dry, cracked tongue pokes out and runs over her curled lips and yellowed teeth. What's inside her? "Do you believe in God, Mr. Oak?" she asks. "I believe that God is an intangible, an energy that runs through all things," I say. "And what of the devil?" "There is no devil," I say, "just a convenient scapegoat." "Oh, Mr. Oak." I think she laughed at me then, a coughing, condescending cackle that hurt to listen to. And then she said, "What do you think is in your truck?" "Can you send it away?" I said. "Can you bring Victoria back from the other side?" "I can," she says in a small, subtle hiss. Then she moves closer to me. "I will drag the devil away, but there's room for two on the boat back to hell. And one is for you, the other is for her," I say. "I'm only here to row," she says. "The other seat is for you." "No," I say, "I'm fine right here, thank you." She hisses, screams, thrashes her arms, and knocks over the pots and plates, the garbage and glass. I swallow the urge to scream and run, to leave Grace and Janet and Victoria here in the desert and carry on blindly, but to find some distance from this spirit. "Do you want it gone?" she asks. "Do you want to bring the woman who belongs in that body back to her family? To be the hero again, Mr. Oak? Isn't that what you always want? To be the hero?" I explain that I want to bring her back, yes, but not to be the hero, just to make her family whole again. She laid out the terms for me to do so clearly and doesn't repeat them. She just stands there and stares at me, that tongue moving over her lips and teeth back and forth like a pendulum of a clock, her breath wheezing and thick. I have no other option, so I agree. She laughs, a gurgling, sour, menacing-sounding grumble. Then she points her long, gnarled finger to the window beside me. "Do you like to watch, Mr. Oak?" I move to the window, pull the towel that's blocking it aside. My eyes ache at the sudden burst of sunlight, but adjust to see my truck baking on the sand. I see into the back seat and see Victoria still sleeping. I felt the sweat soaking into my shirt, the suit coat I wore keeping the heat against my body like tinfoil encouraging the roasting of a potato. I looked to Grace, who had closed her eyes and was standing completely still, as if she'd become stuck between the seconds that moved past me. She drew no breath. Her heart stayed its breathing. Her mind abandoned. Whatever she traded places with in her sleep had stepped out for the moment, and then a scream. I turn back to the truck. Victoria's awake, screaming, clawing at the windows and seats. Her body convulses, she's twisting and contorting into impossible positions. Her head snaps back, her face smashes into the side window, cracking the glass before her body falls through it and crumples onto the dry, cracked earth. I felt the need to vomit. The brutality of it was overwhelming. Janet ran over to Victoria, rolled the heap of a human onto her back and checked her pulse. She looks back to the trailer, our eyes meet, and she gives me an affirming but sad nod. "All aboard, Mr. Oak," Grace said. "It's time to go." I take a minute, turn back to her. "How do I do it?" I ask. "All you need to do is sleep," she said. "I'll take care of the rest." I look at the small, fixed table behind me. I think to call my family, but then think better of it. There's always the risk I won't return when I leave, and if I don't, I'd rather their last memory be the one of a warm embrace and a caring goodbye of the moment I left, and not the panicked misery of a rushed phone call. So I lay on the table, my back on the flat wood, my legs extended out onto the seat. I close my eyes, glad not to have to see Grace's twisted body or that tongue whipping back and forth as she gets closer to me. I breathe slow. The heat is making me tired, but finding sleep in the best of times is a hunt I hardly ever find fruitful. "That's it, Mr. Oak. Just let go." Her voice is a million miles away, a whisper, remnants of where my body lay quietly. I am being pulled like an anchor was tied to my consciousness and thrown into the ether of existence. It is cold. It is dark. It is endless. I feel the hold my body has on me, the connection to my shell growing thinner and weaker. I can no longer feel the breath in my lungs, the beating of my heart, or hear the voice inside my head because I am now the source of that voice, a raw, lost, pure consciousness. I am the singularity of myself. I feel peace and I feel free and I feel nothing. Then I feel a bite on my arm that reverberates through this place and turns everything hot and bright, and I'm being pulled back. I wake back inside the trailer, inside my body, gasping for air. I fall off the table and pull my coat from my sweat-soaked torso. My lifeline, the bracelet that keeps me from drifting too far, has saved me again. I pry the dull spikes from my flesh, unlocking the mechanism and resetting the spring before sliding it from my arm. I rub my eyes and scratch my sweat-soaked hair. I slap my cheeks to know that I'm not asleep and remind myself of what it is to feel. A few feet away, Grace is asleep on the floor. I know that it's just an empty vessel. The creature that inhabited it was gone, and Grace, the real Grace, had yet to return from the other side. I got to my feet, picked up the body, and placed it back into her bed, clicking on the air conditioner before I left. I went outside to gather up the heap Victoria had become. I placed her in the back seat once more, taking note of what was obviously broken and what was questionably intact, and looked back at Janet. I don't think Grace is going to be talking to me anytime soon. She asked if I'd tricked her again, to which I confirmed I had, but with the best of intentions. Victoria woke about a month later in the hospital and remembered nothing of what she'd been through, or the suffering she'd inflicted on her family, who were just happy that the wife and mother they loved had returned. As for me, I still sleep with the pinching device on my wrist and monitor my wife and children as they rest, with a paranoia born of knowing and seeing too much. I'm always trying to ensure that they are on the right side of the thin line between a dream and a nightmare.
Did you enjoy this tale?
Who? Me? Who are you talking to?
No, the listener.
What are you talking to them for? The story's done. They've gone on, haven't they?
Well, maybe not. Maybe they'll listen to us little grivels for a bit. Mr. Oak ain't the only one with a story to share. I have things to say.
What things?
Like maybe if they enjoyed themselves, they should subscribe or follow or leave a review.
Don't be telling them what to do.
I'm not.
It's not polite ordering those poor folks to do things, especially since they ain't here for you. They came for Mr. Oak, didn't they?
Well, how do you know they ain't come for us?
'Cause they don't even know who we are.
All I'm saying is it's good manners to subscribe or follow or leave a review, isn't it?
Is this recording?
Did you hit the button?
Oh, I thought you hit the button.
Oh dear. Mr. Oak won't be happy.